We begin today the Gemara on Daf Hey Amud Beis, 3 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Tanya. The Gemara here is going to bring a Braisa, which will connect back to the opinions we spoke about before regarding the halachas of Par, Helem, Dovish, or Tzibur. Who brings that carbon when the Bezdin paskined and made a mistake, and the Tzibur that fulfilled or relied on the Bezdin? So there was 3 opinions before, so this Braisa will be relevant for that. Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, Rab Shimon said, Ma tamud loymar, what's the meaning in the pasuk where it says, Upar sheni ben boker tikach lachatos, that a second par is brought for a chatos. This is speaking by the Leviim when they are brought into becoming the Leviim to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. So the pasuk says that there's a oila and then there's a second par that's brought for a chatos. So it's an extra pasuk. Why? Because im l'lamed shem shnayim. If it's just to teach the fact that there's a second par, v'haloi kvar nemar, it already says earlier, v'asei es ha'echad chatos, v'es ha'echad oila l'Hashem, that one is going to be a chatos and one is going to be a oila. So it's not necessary to say this pasuk. So what does it mean, sheni? El yochel, the pasuk is coming to say, I would think, tehei necheles chatos l'leviyim, that this carbon chatos should be like it is with usually a carbon chatos, that you can eat from it. Now the gersa in our Gemara actually is for the Leviim, but Leviim is a little bit problematic because usually a carbon chatos, the parts that can be eaten from it, is for the kainim. So others are guided over here in the Gemara that it's for the kainim. But the point is that I would think that this carbon chatos, you can eat the carbon chatos. That it's a second par, which is a second to the oila. Sheni le oila. What does it mean, second to the oila? Ma oila loy nacheles. Just like by the carbon oila, it's oila is always completely burnt in the mizbeach. Af chatos. So too this chatos over here, loy nacheles. You cannot eat it at all. Right, which means usually in the Beis HaMikdash there's 2 kinds of chatos. There's a chatos where the blood is sprayed on the mizbeach achitzen, and that's a chatos that are parts of it that the kohanim eat. Then there's a chatos, the blood of it is sprayed on the mizbeach hapnimi, and that's a chatos that has to be completely burnt. Here, this chatos, according to some opinions, it was actually the blood was brought inside, and therefore you cannot eat it at all. According to other opinions, even if the blood was sprayed outside, like a chatos, that's the chitzonot, blood outside, but nevertheless over here, it's compared to oila, and you can't eat from this chatos. That's why the pasuk uses this lashon of sheni. Okay, now kayetze boy, and here is the case which is relevant for what we're speaking about in our sugya. There's another pasuk where we find a similar diuk and a similar explanation. Rabbi Yosi said, it says in the pasuk regarding the Yidden that returned to Eretz Yisrael when they came to build the second Beis HaMikdash, that haboim mehashvi hagayla, or Bnei HaGoyla, when they came from captivity, from Galus, what did they do? Hekrivu Eilis like Hey Yisrael, they brought Karbanis Eilif for the Eibishter, Parim Shnei Masag V'Gaimer, they brought 12 Parim. And the pasuk concludes, other kinds of components they brought as well, Hakoil Eila. Everything was a Eila. How does the pasuk conclude those words? Hakoil Eila Salkadaitach. Is it possible to say everything was a Eila? In between, the pasuk there says that there was Parim Shnei Masar for all Yidden, there was Tisha, there's other animals that it says the Befedish also Chatos. So why does it say it's all an Oila? Efshe Shachatos Oila. When it mentions there in the pasuk Chatos, is this an Oila? Ela over here means similar to what we said before, Hakoil Ke Oila. All the karbanis that they brought was similar to the Oila. Ma Oila le'nacheles, just like a carbon Oila, you don't eat from it. Af Chatos. So too the chatas that was brought in that case, they did not eat from it at all. Why? Because the Tanya, it says in a Braisa that Rabbi Yehuda explained when the Yidden brought this carbon chatas, when they came to build the second Beis HaMikdash, why were they bringing this carbon? They were bringing it as a kapara for serving Avodah Zarah, meaning for this, that at the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, in the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, in the time of Tzidkiyahu Melech, they served Avodah Zarah. This is Avodah Zarah in the time of Tzidkiyahu, and now, by the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, they brought the carbon chatas for this. And what's the halacha of a carbon chatas that is brought for Avodah Zarah? it's from the Parim and Israfim and Sirim and Israfim. As Rashi here brings, it's Avedis Kechavim for a tzibor that is brought that has to be completely burnt. That's why over here it says that it was similar to the Oila, that it was all burnt. Mefarshim also say that it's similar by the Leviim. The reason why the carbon chatas that the Leviim brought was also completely burnt, because they brought that carbon chatas also as a kapara for Avodah Zarah, because the Leviim took the place of the Bechayrim for a kapara for the Chet Egel, and therefore it was also completely burnt. Okay, but now here the Gemara is going to focus on a detail about these karbanis that the Yidden brought for this Avodah Zarah when they came to build the second Beis HaMikdash. What does it say? How many karbanis chatas did they bring? It says Shneim Asar, 12 of these karbanis. So the way the Gemara understands this at this point is, what kind of karban chatas are we talking about? What we're speaking about here, the par helam davishal tzibur. In the time of Tzidkiyahu Melech, there was the Bezdin that Hayru, they ruled betos that the Yidden can serve Avodah Zarah, and the Yidden did serve Avodah Zarah, and therefore they're bringing karbanis now as a kapara for that. So how do we come to the number of 12? According to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that we had before, Rabbi Yehuda said, this carbon of Parhel and Dovashal Tzibur, who brings it? Every single Shevet is another Kahal, and every Shevet has to bring a carbon. And additionally, Rabbi Yehuda said before that even if only, let's say, 7 Shvatim did the Aveda, the other Shvatim, the other 5, are dragged along. They also have to bring a carbon. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's understood why it's 12. Mishkachas law, lahanish ne'masa chatayis, the 12 chatayis they're bringing here, is either it could go in the chatush ne'masa Shvatim, the ma'aseh ne'masa Asirim, either because all 12 Shvatim followed the Bezin then, and therefore they all have to bring the carbon, the soir, as a chatas to atone. Inami, or the chatu shiva Shvatim, if even only 7 of them, or even less, they sin and with a chet of Avodah Zarah, and b'shara inoch begreda, and the rest are, as the Gemara explained before, according to Rabbi Yehuda, are dragged along and also have to bring a carbon. And according to Rab Shimon, the number of 12 that it says there, Rab Shimon's opinion was that each one of the Shvatim bring a carbon and the Bezdin. You didn't hold this halacha that others are dragged along, other Shvatim, but 12, you could have all Shvatim plus the Bezdin. So here when it says that 12 are bringing a carbon, what's the case? You could say, there are 11 Shvatim that served Avodah Zarah at that time of Tzidkiyahu Melech. So the Ma'asu Achad Asa Siirim, so 11 Shvatim are bringing 11 goats as the Chatos, and the Idach the Bezdin. And the 12th one, like Rab Shimon's opinion is, the Bezdin also has to bring. But according to Rab Meir, what's his opinion? Regarding this halacha of Par Helm Davishal Tzibur, who brings the carbon? Only the Bezdin that was Meire Betas. The light Tzibur, the Tzibur does not bring. So why are there 12 karbanas being brought over here? It's the Bezdin. It should be 1 carbon. Answers the Gemara. The case is Chatu. What happened is, the Bezdin Paskin, they made a mistake, and Klal Yisrael went and did what Bezdin said. So you only have to bring 1. The Bezdin brings only 1 time. But what happened? The Bezdin Paskin once, and then they retracted, and then it happened again, and it happened 12 times. Zimni. This happened 12 times in that time, and therefore now they're coming to bring 12 karbanas for this. The Bezdin is bringing 12 karbanas for this that repeated 12 times. That's the pshat in the number of 12. But now that Gemara has another question on this incident. But those that sinned in the time, in the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, 70 years later, maybe even more, they're not alive anymore. So how are they bringing a carbon, even if the ones that were alive then dedicated animals to be brought as a carbon, but now so many years later, the halacha always by carbon chatos is, any carbon chatos that the owner of it died, that chatos has to be left to die. That's a halacha l'meishem misinai. As we'll see soon, the Gemara will quote the source of this halacha l'meishem misinai. But over here, how are they bringing a carbon for the ones who are in the end of the first Beis HaMikdash? Amar Rav Papa, so Rav Papa answers, Ki gemiri chata shamesu baleh b'miseh. When do we have this halacha l'meishem misinai, that a chatos, that the owner died, the carbon has to be left to die, hanimili b'yachid. When is that the case? When it's an individual that has his carbon chatos. But we don't apply this concept when it comes to a tzibur. Lefi she'ein mise b'tzibur. Because regarding a tzibur, this halacha l'meishem misinai, that if you die, the carbon chatos has to be left to die as well, does not apply by a tzibur. Even after they pass away, you bring the carbon, and you still bring it as a kapara for them. What's the source for this? What's the source that we say that by tzibur we don't consider the death to be a reason not to bring the carbon?
7 years later, the behemoth is not alive.
Yeah, okay. So we're not talking about the behemoth. We're talking about if you want to bring a carbon for them, even if it was a behemoth from later.
What's the problem?
Be the person that's being the
But you can't bring a kapara for them if they're not alive. So it's saying that no, they're still alive. In fact, so the Gemara is looking for a source. Where do we see that by a tzibur, this halacha of misa does not apply? If you're going to say, midchsiv, the pasuk says, tachas avisecha, yu benecha. Pasuk until that says, that in the place of the fathers comes the children. So that means that even when a person dies, his children are alive in his place, and therefore his children can bring a carbon in the place of the father. But if that's what you're learning it out from, afilu b'yachid nami, why not apply this pasuk even regarding any individual that had a carbon chiyuv or a carbon chatos or an actual carbon chatos and now he died? So therefore, this pasuk tachas avisecha cannot be applying to this thing, to this halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Ella says the Gemara, Dukya, the Rav Papa, where Rav Papa is taking this from is Misayir Resh Chodesh, from the goat that's brought also as a chatos on Resh Chodesh. It's brought as a chatos on Resh Chodesh. So where is this brought from? Where are the funds from for this carbon? The Torah says, Ma'asim Trumas Alishka has to be brought from the Trumas Alishka, that's the Machzas HaShekel that was collected from Klal Yisrael. So now what happens? This is collected once a year. Later on in the year, when you're bringing it on Rosh Chodesh, it could be that some of the people that donated the money are not alive anymore. So you're bringing a carbon with the money of those people that are not even alive. There's Yidden that died, that donated this Machzas HaShekel, v'hanach the Paishi. So if so, those that are still alive, heichi ma'isel, how could they bring the carbon with the funds of those people that are not alive anymore? So elo shma mina. So from this we could learn chatos shemesu ba'aleh bitzibur. If it's a chatos that the owner died, but it's a carbon tzibur, karba, you can still bring the carbon. I want to ask on this source as well. Midami. How can you compare our case to the chatos that's brought in Rosh Chodesh? See Rosh Chodesh, by this goat in Rosh Chodesh, I could say dilme loy ma'asim mitzibur. It's a possibility that from the tzibur nobody died. You don't know for sure. It's possibility yes, possibility not. So we're going to go by the chazaka. We're going to say that those that donated, we bring in this year the carbon for them. However, over here, seemingly it's clear that the ones that were there in the end of the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, now so many years later, they died. And if so, how are we bringing the carbon chatas for them, for Avodah Zarah? Alice says the Gemara time that Papa mehacha. The source of our Papa is from here. It said the pasuk says the chsiv. This is by the Egla Arufa. Kapalam Yisrael Shepadisa Hashem. That the Eibusha should forgive for the Yidden for what happened when a person's found not alive, and you have to bring the Egla Arufa there. So it says Asher Padisa. Why is it adding this Asher Padisa? Because Ru'uya Kaparazu, when you bring the Egla Arufa there and you do what has to be done, it's a kapara not only for this incident here, but it's also able to be mechaper, shetachaper al yotze Mitzrayim, even if for an incident like this that happened many years before, from the Yidden that went out of Mitzrayim, that are certainly not alive now, and it'll be a kapara for them as well when you make this Egla Arufa now. Midichsev Asher Padisa. It says there Asher Padisa that it's atoning for the Yidden much earlier when they went out of Mitzrayim for such a kind of an incident. So I see that the kapara of Egla Arufa applies even for those that are not alive now.
What does it mean? Mitzrayim?
If there was a case where someone was found dead in that generation of Yotzei Mitzrayim, so the Egla Rufa done today in Eretz Yisrael will be mechaper actively for them. So the Gemara says, but mi dami. How could you compare this that we find here, that the kapara works for those that are not alive, to our case? Awesome, kuli as sinon. Those that it's being brought for now are here, are alive. So therefore, once it's mechaper for those that are here in this city alive, mechaper nami anesim. So I could say that the kapara will also extend and work for those of Yotzei Mitzrayim that are not alive. But over here in our case, mi havachayim. Who is alive over here from the time of the first Beis Hamikdash that we're bringing a carbon chatas now to atone for them for their Avodah Zarah? So the Gemara answers, our whole assumption is actually not true. And that the truth is that over here, when they came to the second Beis Hamikdash, there were people that were alive from the time of the first Beis Hamikdash. The Chsiv, the pasuk says, V'rabim ha'kainim v'alevim v'rashi avos v'goyimim, many of the kainim and the Leviim and the other leaders. And the pasuk goes on to say that when they saw the second base of Mikdash, that was being built, so they raised their voice and crying. There was those that were also very happy. So who is it referring to? Those that came and were crying. It's actually referring to those that were there by the first Beis HaMikdash. And they saw how great the first Beis HaMikdash was. And at the time, the second Beis HaMikdash, it was different things that were missing. And therefore they were crying. So we see that amongst them were those from the first Beis HaMikdash. So therefore you can bring a carbon now to be mechaper for the Avodah Zarah of that time. Frek the Gemara, but it's not enough because V'dilma mu'atanavu, maybe they're just a minority. V'loi rabim avu, and they're not the rabbim of the people that are here now. Even though it says v'rabim me'akayanim, it means there were many, but it doesn't mean that they are actually the majority. So if the carbon is being brought for par helm davashal tzibur, that's when you have the rabbim of Klal Yisrael that follow the bezdin. But if it's only a minority that's left, so you can't bring a carbon anymore. So the Gemara says, no, actually, when the Yidden came to the second Beis HaMikdash, Haksiv, in the pasuk there it says that v'lo yikiru, or the actual lashon of the pasuk here is ve'ein ha'al makirim koil truas hasimcha lekoil b'chiyam v'goyme, that the ones that were crying was so loud that you couldn't hear the sound of those that were laughing, that had joy. V'hakoil nishmad le'merachak, and they heard the sound of those that were crying very far. So what does it mean? Who were the ones that were crying? The ones from the first Beis HaMikdash. And their voice of crying was even greater than the ones that were happy. So we see over here that the ones that were still alive from the time of the first Beis HaMikdash were the majority at that time. And therefore the carbon is being brought as a kapara for those from the first Beis HaMikdash. Okay, now the Gemara has another question on this whole thing. How are they bringing a carbon to be mechaper for the Avodah Zarah that they did at that time? When the Yidden served the Avodah Zarah at that time, it was amazing. It wasn't a shaygig, like the Gemara began saying that there's a bezdin that made a mistake and they were maida and there's a par helem dover. It's not a helem dover. They were all b'meizer at that time. They served the Avodah Zarah. Answers the Gemara, Horayos shah haisa. This that they brought the karbanis now, it was a special Horayos shah. It was an instruction for that hour that they should do this. So the Mefarshim say that if that's the case, then I think Taisus here says it, that this also answers all the whole discussion over here, everything that we were talking about. Why 12 and why they're bringing, even though they're not alive anymore. Now we can go back and say that maybe they were not mostly alive, but nevertheless it's a Horayos shah to bring these karbanis. It's logical to say that it's a special Horayos shah dilei teimach. If you're not going to say so, the pasuk we quoted before goes on to say the number of karbanis that they brought besides the 12 that I mentioned before. It says Elin Tishav v'shisha, there was 96 rams, kvasim shivim v'shiva, and 77 lambs. Keneged me. What is the number of these additional karbanis that they brought corresponding to who is this number? Ella Horayos shah haisa. It's all Horayos shah for that time. Achanami Horayos shah haisa. The fact that these karbanis are mechape even for a mezid, it's all Horayos shah. Ton Rabbanon, we learned in a braise meis echad minat tzibur. So if one of the tzibur that relied on the bezdin, in the case when the bezdin paskin their mistake, and they all did what the bezdin said, now one of the people of the tzibur passed away. Chayavin, they're still going to be chayiv to bring the par helem davashal tzibur. Echad mi bezdin, if it's one of the bezdin that passed away, then peturin, then they'll be potter of bringing this carbon. Says the Gemara Mantana, who's the Tana of this Braise? So again, we had the opinions before, and it was quoted here. We got Rab Meir, Rab Yehuda, Rab Shimon. Who exactly brings this carbon helm davashal tzibur? Is it the Klal Yisrael, the 12 Shvatim? Is it Bezdin? Is it both? Who's the Tana of this Braise? Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Rav Zeire, Amar Rab Yirmiyeh, Amar Rav, Rab Meir. This Braise is going to be only according to the opinion of Rab Meir. Why? Because the Amar Bezdin Mivian. Rab Meir says it's the Bezdin that brings the carbon. V'loy tzibur. The tzibur does not bring this carbon at all. So Hilkach, so now what the Braise says makes sense. Meisachad benat tzibur. If one of the tzibur dies, Chayavin, the Bezdin still has to bring the carbon. The Hakoyim Kuli Bezdin. The Bezdin that brings the carbon, they're all still alive. Meis Echad mi Bezdin, but if one of the Bezdin dies, then Peturin. Then they're potter because the Havyalah. Chatos shemeis echad min hashutfin, because this is a case of a chatos where one of the owners of the carbon passed away. Shemachi peturin, and therefore they're going to be potter. It's not exactly the Gemara uses the term shutfin, but it's really a borrowed term. There's no such a thing usually as a chatos that's of shutfin. But this is the parallel dovishal tzibur that the bezdin brings, and if one of the bezdin passes away, so you can't bring this carbon anymore. So the brayso makes sense, but it's only according to Rav Meir. Maskefla Rav Yosef, but Rav Yosef asks on this, v'noik Rav Shimon. Why can't we explain what it says in this brayso according to Rav Shimon as well? The Amar. So again, what's Rav Shimon's opinion? Rav Shimon says bezdin im atzibur, that both have to bring the carbon. Bezdin brings one carbon, and then the tzibur also has to bring. Each shevet has to bring a carbon as well. So how can we explain this brayso? So based on what we learned before, we can explain it as follows: that this brayso holds meisachat menat tzibur. If one of the tzibur dies, chayavin, they still have to bring their carbon. The tzibur also brings; they still have to bring their carbon, even though someone died. Why? Because the ein tzibur meisen. By a tzibur, the mise does not take away their status, their chiyav to bring the carbon. However, meisachat be bezdin. If one of the bezdin dies, then peturin, but then they're potek kedam rinon. As we said, the chatos shutfin he. This is a chatos where the bezdin has to bring. This is not called the bezdin is not a tzibur. They all together have to bring this carbon. As if someone of the bezdin dies, so they can't bring this carbon anymore. So it can fit even according to Rav Shimon's opinion. So why did the Gemara before say? Rav said that it's only according to Rav Meir.
If somebody from the tzibur dies, shouldn't bring it.
Because if someone from the tzibur dies, then it's a chatos shemesu ba'aleha. Usually the halacha l'moshe Sinai regarding a chatos that the owner dies is that you can't bring the chatos anymore. So over here it's saying that doesn't apply by a tzibur. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye asks Rav Yosef, how is he suggesting that Rav Shimon should be the Tana of this brayso? We find something else that Rav Shimon said. Shamina Leila Rav Shimon, we find that Rav Shimon's opinion is the Omar Chatos Shutvin Ein a Mesa. That even regarding a Chatos, not of a tzibur, but in a case of a Chatos that's being brought, and there's a few owners of this Chatos. Usually there's no such a kind of Chatos, but here it's going to bring another case where you have such a kind of Chatos, similar to what we have here with the Bezdin. And we find that Rav Shimon holds that regarding this kind of case of Shutvin as well, we say that if one person passed away, they could still bring the carbon. The Tanya, we learned in Abraises, where do we have another example of a chatas like this? On Yom Kippur. So it says, the bull or the goat on Yom Kippur, she'ovdu. They got lost. And then instead, they already separated and they brought another one in their place. And now they were found. They were found, that is. Yomusa kulan. So they all have to be left to die. Divri Rabbi Yehuda, this is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Because this is another case where we say that the chatas has to be left to die. When the bailam of the carbon chatas already brought a different behemoth as a carbon. Rabbi Lazar Rab Shimon say yiru. Then in this case, it's not included in this halacha that it's left to die. It has to be left to graze until it gets a mum, and then you could redeem it. Because this concept that by a tzibur, we don't say that if one person died, you can't bring it anymore. This applies also over here. He's using this lashon of tzibur, but this is really not a case of tzibur. The par v'soyer that we're talking about over here is the carbon that the Kohen Gadol brings for his brothers, the Kohanim, as a kapara on Yom Kippur, and all the Kohanim are partners. In other words, it's a carbon chatos that's being brought for their sake. And what does Rab Shimon say over here? That regarding this carbon chatos, we apply the same rule that it's not left to die. So if that's the case, how can you say that this brayso here would be Rab Shimon? That if one of the bezdin dies, then they'll be potter, because by the bezdin, we don't compare them to a tzibur. They're just shutvin that bring this carbon. And here, if one of them dies, it's you could still use the carbon. But it's not true. Over here, if one of them dies, you can't bring the carbon anymore. According to Rab Shimon, by a bezdin, they're similar to a tzibur. If one of them dies, you can't bring the carbon. Like I see, Rab Shimon is saying over here regarding the Kainim. Similar to the bezdin, same kind of concept. The Kainim, if one of them, if over here it's not talking about dying, it's a little bit of a different case. It got lost and they brought another one. So over here we say yiru, that we leave it to graze, and we don't apply this halacha of that the chatas tzibur has to die. Yeah. So Amalei Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef answers him and says, "You're proving to me Rab Shimon's opinion regarding the subject. From where? from the Kayanim, the power of Asar Yom Kippur from the Kayanim. How could you compare? Kayanim Kamerit, your proof is from the Kayanim. Shani Kayanim, the Ikra Kahal. Kayanim, we find in the Pasuk that they are called a congregation for themselves. Yeah, so by the Kayanim, there Rav Shimon says that if their Karban Chatos was lost and that they brought already another one, there the halacha that the Karban Chatas is left to die does not apply, specifically by Kayanim. But we can't prove though from there regarding a Bezdin. By a Bezdin, I could still say that according to Rav Shimon, that if someone died from the Bezdin, they're potter, they don't bring the carbon anymore. Where do we see that the Kayanim are called a Kahal? The Chsiv, the Pasuk says, Ala Kayanim, Valkol Amakol Yechaper. That for the Kayanim and for the whole nation, which is the Kahal, the congregation, this will be a kapara. So it says Kayanim and then it says Amakol. So we see the Pasuk is comparing them, that Kayanim are also called, not included, they're similar, also called a Kal as well. Therefore, we could still say that the Braisa before should go like Rav Shimon. This is Rav Yosef's question. Okay, so we see over here a discussion, a machlokes between Rav Yosef and Abaye. What's the story with Rav Shimon's opinion regarding this kind of a case where there's a chatos that's not mamish from a tzibor, but it's a chatos that's being brought by shutfin, which is either the case of the Bezdin or the case of the Kayanim. Abaye was comparing the two and saying that we see that Rav Shimon holds that they could still bring the carbon, and therefore the Braisa that says that they can't, Peturin, cannot be Rav Shimon. And Rav Yosef is saying, no, Kayanim is a different story. By Kayanim, they're called a Kal. But in the Braisa, by the Bezdin, over there, it could still work with Rav Shimon's opinion that they'll be potter if one of them dies. Okay, so now here the Gemara is going to discuss this inyan itself regarding the Kayanim, and then it's going to come back to this discussion regarding Rav Shimon, the machlokes of Abaye and Rav Yosef regarding Rav Shimon. The Gemara is going to come back to that. But it just brought up this new concept that Kayanim are called a Kahal for themselves. So the Gemara asks on this, Ela Mayata. If that's the case, so you're telling me that Kayanim are called a Kahal, Naisu Par Bayra. So if so, in this halacha we're speaking about, by Par Helm Davashal Tzibur with the Bezdin Paskin and the Klal Yisrael went and followed what the Bezdin said. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Shimon, every shevet is called a Kahal, and every shevet has to bring a carbon in this case. So according to what we're saying now, that Kayanim are also called a Kahal, they should bring separately a carbon as a Kahal for following the Bezdin. Now, if you'll say, they bring a carbon for themselves as well, but that can't be because then tafilu shvatim. So then there's an extra shevet over here that's bringing more than the numbers that we had before. We had the numbers before. The Mishnah said that the numbers, it's 12, or according to Rav Shimon, it's 13, but over here it's going to come out that there's an extra one. How could that be? So Elam Rav Achi Rabbi Yaakov, so Rabbi Yaakov explains, Shiftoi Shalevi Loi Ikrukal. That regarding this halacha of Par Helen Davashal Tzibur, the whole Shevet Levi is not only the Kayanim, the entire Shevet Levi is not called a Kahal. Because the Pasuk says, Hineni Mafrecha, Ve'beisicha, Ve'nesaticha, Lekal Amim V'gaimer. That you'll multiply and you'll have a Kahal Amim. This is the Pasuk that says by Yaakov Avinu. And then over there, the pasuk concludes and says, "V'nasati sa'aretz hazois l'zarecha acharecha achuza soilam." Right. So what is it saying over here? That kol sheyesh lo achuza ikri kahal. That whoever, the pasuk is saying that who is called a kahal, only those that have an inheritance in the Beis Hamikdash, that's who is called a kahal. V'chol she'en lo achuza lo yikri kahal. But whoever does not have an achuza is not called a kahal. Okay, so the simple pshat of our Gemara here is that we're actually saying that not the Kayanim, not only the Kayanim, the whole Shevet Levi, actually. The whole Shevet Levi is not called a Kol. So regarding Par Helm Davashal Tzibur, they don't bring a carbon for themselves. And also before, regarding the halacha of the Chatas Shamesu Balel, regarding the case where they found a carbon Chatas that was lost, they're not in the category of a kohol. You can't say like what Rabbi Yosef said, oh, the Kayanim are different, they're called a kohol. They're not called a kohol. So if so, the Braisa is not going to be according to Rav Shimon. Because there's actually two gerses over here in Rashi, if the Braisa is still going to be Rav Shimon or it's not going to be Rav Shimon. Okay, it's a little bit complicated over here. It's a Taisus Rosh. There's a discussion over exactly how this goes back to the Gemara before, whether the Gemara is suggesting that the Braisa should be like Reb Shimon or not. But okay, let's stick to what the Gemara is saying here. The Gemara is saying that here we see in the Pasuk that the whole Shevet Levi is not called a call. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, so then how the problem becomes the opposite. When we said before the numbers, when they follow the Bezdin and they bring the Karbonis, it's 12. So then it's missing from 12 Shvatim. Shevet Levi is not called a call. They don't have to bring any carbon if so. Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, Ephraim u'Menashe, Keruvim v'Shimon Yili. Yaakov says that Ephraim and Menashe are divided into 2 Shvatim and they are 2, just like Reuven and Shimon are 2. So Levi is out, but Ephraim and Menashe is counted as 2. So therefore we still have 12. But Omar Rav asks him this: how could you say Ephraim and Menashe take their place? V'oksiv, regarding what are Ephraim and Menashe called to? It says there, Al Sheim Achem Yikoru b'Nachlasam L'Nachla. That only regarding inheritance, to have a portion in the land. For that they get one portion for Ephraim, one for Menashe. Only for Nachla they compared to Reuven and Shimon. But v'lo davar acher, not for anything else. So over here, regarding the halach of Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, Ephraim and Menashe will not bring a separate carbon for each of them. So we still have the question, how do we have 12? So the Gemara asks, V'loi, is this not the case? They're not divided as 2 shvatim for anything besides inheritance in the land. We find regarding the flags when they camped in the Midbar, so Ephraim was like one Shevet and that joined one camp, and Menashe joined another. So we see that even regarding the way they camped, they're divided into 2. And says the Gemara, Kenachlasan, Kachaniyasan, that regarding with the way they camped in the Midbar, it was similar to the way their inheritance is in Eretz Yisrael. Because Yaakov Avinu, he tells them that they're going to have an inheritance in Eretz Yisrael, and they're going to dwell this way also in the Midbar. And it says actually also in the Medrash, Rashi brings Ishal Digloi, that it was similar to the way they carried the Oren of Yaakov Avinu when they went out of Mitzrayim, or they came to bury Yaakov Avinu. So Yaakov said that they'll camp the same way in the Midbar, and Ephraim and Menashe are separate. So regarding the fact that in the Golim they're separate, that's not a raya that we should say that they're considered to be 2 shvatim for everything else. It's only regarding this. Another point the Gemara says, or you could say, Kedei l'chalek kavod l'degalim. It's in order that they should be divided equally. They have kavod, in other words, the honor for each one of the degalim. If you're not going to divide Ephraim and Menashe into 2, it's going to come out that one of the degalim is going to be missing 3 shvatim because there were 4. So if you divide 12 into 4, so then there should be 3 for each one of the camps. So therefore they divided Ephraim and Menashe, so there should be 3 for each one of the groups. But I still find that they're divided for another matter. We see regarding the Nesiim, Ephraim and Menashe had separate Nesiim when it came by the Chanukah's Hamishkan, and we see that they are separate Nesiim. And says the Gemara, Hahu lachloik kavod l'Nesiim. So that's also only for the sake of honor, to give honor for the Shevet Ephraim and Menashe, so they gave them Nesiim separately. But you can't prove from there that this would apply also to Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. Because the Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, Shloime, when he built the first base of Mikdash, how long was the celebration? So it says 7 days. So why did Moshe Rabbeinu make the celebration of the inauguration of the Mishkan for 12 days? The Nesiim brought the Karbanis for 12 days. Answer is, because he wanted to give the kavod for each Nasi to have his day to bring the carbon. If it would be 7 days, that some of them will not have their own day. So we see that he wanted to give kavod to each one of them. Therefore, he gave Shevet Ephraim and Menashe also their separate kavod. But this is only b'negeya to these matters mentioned there. But b'negeya to Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, they're not divided into separate shvatim. Okay. So now the Gemara goes back to the discussion that we started with, which is Rab Shimon. What's Rab Shimon's opinion regarding a case of Shutfin, which is basically what this Braisa is talking about when one of the Bezdin passed away, and the Braisa said that then they'll be potter. So the Gemara said, well, we could say that that's Rab Shimon's opinion, because when one of the Bezdin passes away, it's a Chatas HaMesa, and by Chatas HaMesa, you can't bring the carbon anymore. And then Abaye said, no, but according to Rab Shimon, by Shutfin, I say that they're like a tzibur. And even if the chatas if someone passes away, you could still bring the carbon. So maybe the Braisa is Rab Shimon. So the Gemara now continues and says, how do we resolve that machlokes? What's the story? What's Taka Rab Shimon's opinion about this? My Havi Allah. So what's the Allah? What's Rab Shimon's opinion about this? Toshama, the Gemara brings a raya from a Braisa where Rab Shimon says halacha that we'll see what he holds. The Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, Rab Shimon says, Chomesh chatois meisois. Here, this is the source where you see this halacha l'Moshe misinai that we say that there's chatois that have to be left to die. And there's 5 cases. Vlad chatos, karm chatos, usually by an individual. Karm chatos is in a keva, so if it gives birth, it has to be left to die. Tmuras chatos, if someone takes chulin and says that this chulin should be a chatos in exchange, in the place of this chatos, it takes effect, and that tmura of chatos also cannot be brought as a carbon, it's left to die. V'chatos shemeisu ba'aleh, and that what we were talking about, a chatos that the owner died, and v'chatos sheniskapru ba'aleh, a chatos where the owner already got their kapare with another behemoth, so like the case we had before, if the original chatos got lost, and then they brought a different carbon, and now they found it, and v'chatos she'ovra shnasa, and a chatos that a year passed from after they were makdashit for the carbon and they didn't bring it as a carbon, it has to be left to die. Those are the 5 cases of a halacha l'Moshe misinai that applies by a chatos. Now, Rab Shimon goes on to say, you can't apply some of these scenarios that we just mentioned regarding if it's a chatos of a tzibur. You can't say v'lat chatos b'tzibur, that there would be a baby born from a chatos that's from the tzibur, because she'ein tzibur mafrish in a keva. Because when a tzibur brings a carbon chatos, they're not bringing an a keva, they're bringing a zacha, so there's no vlad. You can't say that there would be a scenario of a tumura of the chatos if it's a chatos of a tzibur. She'ein tumura b'tzibur. The halacha by the chatos of a tzibur is that the tumura never takes effect. And also, you can't say by the tzibur that if the owner dies, you don't bring the carbon because she'ein tzibur mason. Because by the tzibur, we don't apply this halacha that if someone dies, you can't bring the carbon anymore. Okay, so now the question here, the Braisa goes on to say, sheniskapru ba'aleh. However, the last 2 points, a case where the kapara was already brought with another carbon, or the last case that was mentioned, v'sha'avra shnasa, if the year passed. So loy shamaynu. This, it's unclear whether we should say that over here by the tzibur as well, it doesn't apply to say that it has to be left to die, or maybe not. Maybe regarding this, we say that even by a chatas of a tzibur, it will be left to die. So the Braisa goes on, we didn't hear. So yochel yamusu. If so, I would think to say that since it's possible that this should happen by a chatas of a tzibur, maybe over here the halacha l'Moshe misinai does apply even for the chatas of the tzibur that's left to die. So Amre, so this is all Rab Shimon speaking. So Rab Shimon says, you'll say that no, that's not the conclusion. The conclusion is by a tzibur, none of these halachas apply, including these last 2 cases. How do I know? I learn out what is not clear from what we see is clear. Just like I find regarding the first 3 scenarios, when there's a baby born, or there's a tmure, or the owner dies, that this is all biyachid, dvaram amurim. The halacha that the chatas has to be left to die is only by an individual, but v'loy b'tzibur, not if it's a tzibur. So also the last 2, even though they're possible to happen by a carbon tzibur, I nevertheless say sheniskapru ba'aleh v'sha'avra shnasa. If the kapara was already brought and the year already passed, when do I say that the chatas has to be left to die? B'yochid varam amurim. That was only said regarding the chatas of a yochid, but v'loy b'tzibur. I don't apply this regarding a tzibur. Okay, so till here is the lashon of the Braisa. Rab Shimon says. So Rab Shimon is basically saying this whole halacha l'Moshe misinai. It's quoted in the Shas a number of times. That we say there's the 5 chatois that we say that has to be left to die. It's all only by a chatas of a yachid, not by a tzibur. All 5 cases. Now the Gemara asks on this last point here, how could you say this? How is he learning this out? Do you ever say such a thing? That you learn out a shaila that you have regarding a case where it's possible for this to happen, and you're learning it out from where? From a case where it's just impossible, and therefore it doesn't apply there. You don't have any source to say regarding the first 3 scenarios that over there we don't apply the halacha l'Moshe misinai. Maybe it does, but it's just impossible. So we're learning out from the last 2 cases where it is possible from a case which is impossible. What kind of a limud is this? So the Gemara explains this is what Rab Shemin meant. Rab Shemin b'chad mokim gomer. According to Rab Shemin, this whole halacha l'Moshe Misinai was all together. It was all said that if you have a kind of chatas where one of these 5 scenarios are possible, then you have the halacha l'Moshe Misinai for each case individually that it has to be left to die. But if it's a case where it's not possible that it should be all these 5 cases, the halacha l'Moshe Misinai was not said there. That's what he's trying to say. This is l'chatchila how the halacha l'Moshe Misinai was received. Only regarding a yachid where all 5 cases are possible to happen, not by the sibur. So what's the Gemara proving from this? The same thing is also regarding the shutfin, a chatas of a shutfin, that over there, the concept of meisu balea, we're also going to say that it doesn't apply over here. Because by the shutfin, there's no halacha of tmura by shutfin. So we see already by the shutfin that not all 5 could apply. Tmura cannot apply over there, that's for sure. There's one more that Rashi brings that can't apply by shutfin. So if by shutfin not all 5 could apply, so the halacha of chata shemesa balel does not apply by shutfin as well. And therefore, when we're speaking about over here beneged to bezdin, you can't say that the pshat over here is that the bezdin are shutfin and they're going to be potter because it's a chata shemesa balel. It doesn't apply by a bezdin which are shutfin. So therefore, this brayso that the Gemara quoted before cannot be according to Rab Shemin. Hadran Allah Chayru Bezdin. We shall return to you the first Perek of Masechta Horayos.